Jake, and this is the Fireside Tattoo Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm super excited to resume this series with our friend Carson Hill of Numa Tattoo Machines. This is the 5th installment of this interview that we did with Carson, and if you haven't seen the other 4, I would recommend that you go back and watch those. You don't necessarily have to watch them in order, but you might get a better understanding of some of the verbiage and stuff that we're using in this episode. This series has taken some pretty deep dives into the mechanics of tattoo machines, how they affect skin, variables, things like that, so it wouldn't hurt to go back and start from the beginning. In this episode, we are talking about the most forgiving tattoo machines, or the best tattoo machines for beginners. So we're asking questions like, what makes a machine forgiving? What are the variables of a forgiving tattoo machine? What does that even mean, forgiving? Does it mean that it does less trauma in the skin? Does it mean that you get more passes in a particular area without beating up the skin? So those are the types of questions that we're asking in this episode. And of course, it's not a one-size-fits-all or a super easy answer, but we try to peel back the layers of the onion and discover as much as we can about forgiving tattoo machines. Real quickly before we get going, I do want to thank our sponsors for this episode. I'll start with Carson Hill and Numa Tattoo Machines. You can get a 10% discount with the code Fireside at numatattoo.com. There's a link in the video description below. So if you were to find yourself a little confused by the end of this episode and maybe not knowing what type of setup you need in a Rotary tattoo machine, Carson would be the perfect type of machine builder to reach out to. He's small enough that he still kind of is hands-on with every machine that goes out the door. So you could literally just reach out to him and ask, what type of setup would you recommend for me? I do, black and gray realism. I like to layer and build up over multiple passes, or I do super traditional bold work and I just want to get in and out of the skin. And he can set the machine up to your needs and ship it out where you can just kind of plug and play. And then if you did have any questions or wanted to play with other variables, he's really communicative. Communicative, is that right? He'll respond to any questions that you have. So I can't recommend Numa Tattoo Machines enough. I've been using them myself for the last 6 months or so, and I really love this Numa 4. Another sponsor, Reinventing the Tattoo. Our friend Guy Aitchison and Gabe Ripley have been putting a ton of work into creating really, really great content on a regular basis. Tons of live like webinars, discussion panels, things like that on the Reinventing the Tattoo app. There are tons of free little goodies that you can get through Reinventing without being a subscriber. For example, I lead a Monday morning drawing group that you can either watch on our YouTube channel or at Reinventing or through their actual app, mobile app. There are other things like that, things that you don't have to be a paid subscriber necessarily for. But if you would like to be a paid subscriber, you get so much more. First off, you get access to the Reinventing the Tattoo book, which really changed tattooing 20 some odd years ago. And there are tons of updated chapters, video lessons based on a lot of the chapters, guest chapters. Guy leads a Monday night drawing and drawing exercise group. So they have specific assignments each week that Guy will kind of put out there, and then you all kind of get together on Monday nights and draw together and critique and troubleshoot, things like that. Really can't recommend it enough. The subscription is only about $300 a year. If you use the link below and enter the promo code Fireside, saves you 10%, about $30 on that. Well worth that. I mean, it's a fraction of the cost of a single tattoo to get tons of great educational content. Who else? TSM Pro. You've heard me talk about TSM Pro for the last couple of months. They really do a great job at simplifying the lives of tattooers, tattoo shop owners, tattoo shop managers, so that you can focus your time on becoming a better tattooer and a better artist, and not spend quite so much time with booking and scheduling consultations and trying to get all the information you need from your clients and marketing and all that. They really have some fantastic tools for helping tattooers to simplify their business life. Click the TSM Pro link and they have tons of big discounts on their services with the promo code Fireside. Last but certainly not least is our great friends at our great friends at S8 Tattoo. They have been with us really longer than anyone. S8 has helped Fireside so much over the years, with really just a ton. You can get 10% off of all of S8's supplies at the link below with the code Fireside, including their red stencil paper. If you've never used the red stencil paper, I would recommend that you try it out. You can see lines so much easier through red stencils than you can through purple stencils. I don't know if you knew that, but you definitely can. There's a little bit of a learning curve for putting those stencils on and making sure that they stick really well like the purple stencils, but once you do it once, you'll be able to do it each time. And I actually have a tutorial on their website that walks you through how to put those stencils on to make sure that they last and they're nice and bold and stand out for you. All right, no more sponsors. That's it. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you again for supporting what we do. You know, we both probably ended up with whatever machine our mentors suggested, or whatever machine was like already at the shop. There weren't as many options.
The truth also is, like, you'd love to just tell somebody, okay, buy this one, it's the best, and you'll never have to buy another machine again. But so on the one hand, like, wouldn't that be great? On the other hand, there's something about the process of like, I'm sure some people are going to hate to hear this part too, because, you know, process of going through machines is costly. Although I will say that as tattooers, we are lucky, right? Our equipment costs this much and our income is this big, you know, compared to like some of these, you know, like if you were an electrician, for example, and you had to buy tooling for that, or a contractor, you'd have to buy so much tooling, it could cost you $20,000-$30,000 for your equipment. And it's not like a drill lasts forever. You're gonna use it, it's gonna burn out, you gotta buy a new one. So we're lucky, we buy these machines for $500 to $1,000 or whatever, and
use them indefinitely. I'm glad you brought that. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's funny when I've had this thing on my Trello board, the thing, my organizer, that for the last several months, it's like, figure out specifically how much it costs to run my single person studio per day or per tattoo. Right. And I've been trying to make time to do that, only because I know, because I live in other worlds too, in the real estate world, what it takes for most people, how much of most people's income, especially entrepreneurs or whatever you call us, people who are self-employed, how much of their income actually goes to their materials. You know, a lot of times 10, 15, 20% or more. And I bet you, I haven't run the numbers yet, but I bet we're less than 3%. Well, to set up and do a tattoo.
Right. So let's say you bought a tattoo machine for $750, right? And it should let's say it only lasted a year. Mm-hmm. Okay, which is a huge understatement. It's going to last years. Right. Let's say you buy one machine every year, and then like how much? So if you were to divide that into days, let's say you're only working 100 days that year, right? So it's $7.50 per day that it costs you to own your machine. And so let's say you might do 2-3 tattoos that day, most cases, right? So now we're talking about $2.50. So part of your setup was $2.50 for your machine. And then let's say you used 5 cartridges and each of those was $2, right? So there's $10. And then you used what, like $1 worth of paper towels. You know, so all in, your whole station and like extravagant setup was $20. Yeah. Unless you're one of those guys that has a $1,200 light and, you know, and all that stuff. Obviously, you got to take that into consideration. So,
yeah, but yeah, that's. I'm glad you brought that up. I think that we, you know, we're anytime I talk about something that I'm using, I've been using lately the dip caps to clean my needles. I like them. They really pull, like when the needle comes out, it's like shiny. And they're not that expensive at all. But anytime I talk to other people about them, and they're not sponsored or anything, I just use them. But anytime I talk to anyone about them, they're like, that's the last thing I need is something else to buy, something else to set up at my station. And it's like, man, those things are like $1, and you can cut them into, they're a big round thing. I cut them into quarters. So one of them lasts me for 4 tattoos because I roll it on all of its sides, you know, while I'm tattooing. It's like, well, come on, man. Like,
you have what? You have a $25 setup?
Right.
Like, just add it to the cost of the tattoo.
Yeah.
Nobody would even notice it. Plus, you're probably making a few $100 minimum on the tattoo anyway. So,
yeah. Absolutely. So, but we are talking about. So our question here is, what if I'm a beginner? What's the all-around best, machine for me? So we are talking about people that are struggling. They're probably going to buy a machine.
Sure.
Which back in our day, you didn't buy one machine, anyways. Now in the Rotary world, you do just buy one machine. But I had, when I started tattooing, I'd never heard of only using one machine to tattoo. You at least had a liner and a shader.
Yeah. And I would actually suggest that, strictly out of convenience alone, having two machines just makes your life so much easier. Even if it's two rotaries,
Mm-hmm.
having one set up as a liner and one set up as a shader. Of course, that means you have to figure out which two machines do I want now, right?
Right.
Unless you've got something that it can conform to just about any style.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyway, what I was ultimately trying to say was that it's nice to know, like we were talking about in a previous episode, that we're like some of the modern tattooers, they don't know what it's like to make a needle and use a needle jig and scrub tubes and all that shit, and hand make needles and bend them just the right amount and leave the solder back just the right amount for depending on what approach you're going for. And so they're missing out on those factors, and also not really sure why they like this brand of needle cartridge versus this brand of needle cartridge and that kind of thing. So to connect to that a little bit, I would say that using a machine that has mechanical give will help you understand, okay, me using a machine that had mechanical give helps me to understand why I didn't like that. Or having a machine that has electronic give helps me to understand, what does that mean? What is actually happening? And is that something I need or isn't it? So I think that there is something like, as a business owner, I'd love to just say, you know what, Numa 4 is going to offer you everything that you need. It's going to give you lining capability, shading capability, blending or packing. It's light, it's easy to use. It's got all the different weights. Actually, you can use light, heavy, and blah, 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 right? But I also think that it's important to know as much about this industry as there is to know. And the more that you know, the knowledge that you can attain along your path is going to help you become a better practitioner of tattoos and ultimately a better artist in the long run.
So one thing that I've said a lot on our show over the years is you don't want to be bending your own natural mark making to fit the way a machine is running. And I mostly have said that talking about back using coils, and the machine would change and I would have to change the way that I was working that day. But if you are a beginner and you have enough money to buy one machine, I guess my question is, how much can you depend on the way that you draw, because you don't know how to tattoo yet, right? You're just learning to tattoo. So does it make sense to buy, to buy a machine that is, and this will lead in kind of into, I guess, to our next kind of subject anyways, it's something that is as forgiving as possible, and then learn how to adapt to that machine early on? Or no?
I guess there's different ways of looking at it, right? And I guess this will be an opinion answer. I mean, I'm not sure. Like, if you look back at my approach and everything, my journey, let's call it. I learned a lot in the process. I've tried everything, and I think that all of that has played a part into where I am today. It wasn't a direct path, and it wasn't an efficient path, right? But there's a wealth of knowledge that was gained in the process. And to me, that's really valuable. Would I go back and would I change that? No, I wouldn't. But does it make sense to tell somebody, well, start with the stuff that's harder to use and conform yourself to that, and then eventually you'll work yourself up to, a good, the high quality stuff or whatever, right? Or the thing that is really suitable for you. I don't know if that's the right answer too, because the other thing to consider is that we're not at the end of the story. We're still in the middle. We're always going to be in the middle. And where the technology is today will be outdated by the time they get to this stage in their career, right? And
Right.
who knows what that will be like. They'll look back on the stuff that we're using today and say, oh yeah, it's like something that I remember when I was starting tattooing and I was getting into conventions, right? And I loved the conventions. I remember the old schooler guys would be like, oh man, the conventions, they suck. Like when I was getting into conventions, it was glorious, and they have really good reasons why, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny, the last convention I went to, I kind of was thinking something similar to that. I was like, man, it's just not what it used to be. The conventions, like, it felt really like empty, and like there just wasn't that like vibe that I remember. It's just not the same. And I started thinking, oh, man, I'm turning into that like older guy now, looking
Right.
back and saying, oh, when I was your age kind of shit. But I don't know where I was really
Yeah,
going with that.
it's funny that you mentioned that. I think one of the things, and we do a lot of, before COVID, we did conventions. We probably do like 8 to 10 a year, basically one a month, just for just podcasting and stuff. And the thing that I've noticed we've done is, instead of exploring and trying new conventions, we keep going back to the ones where we know people will be that we already know. And the reason that I think we do that is because, like you, when I started doing conventions, and I probably did my first convention in like 98, 99. We didn't do a lot, but in the early 2000s, we did several, but there were only like 10. There weren't that many. It wasn't like, you definitely didn't have like a website like I forget what the website's called, but it shows like all the world tattoo events. And there's like 3 of them every weekend. Like, you might have seen one a month if you were willing to go anywhere. But in a reasonable area for me, there maybe were like 4 or 5 a year that I could like get to. And I think that, they were a bigger deal when there were only a handful of them. And now, whenever there are competing conventions, that they could throw rocks at each other. It's a different kind of world.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's completely off topic. But yeah, I get what you're.
Well, it was off topic, but what I was relating that to was the natural progression of the way things go. And in another 10 years down the line, the people who are starting tattooing now will look back at today and say the same things that we're saying now about, like, oh, when I was getting started, it was better. It was, richer and all of that. So who knows what is going to happen. And I think that, I guess what the ultimate point, what I'm trying to make, is that I wouldn't necessarily recommend somebody that's getting started in tattooing today take the exact same path that all of us took. That seems to be the error that all the old schoolers make, is to judge the new guys and say, well, you should have done it the way that I did it, right? But that's not how we progress, And I don't know exactly how progression is supposed to happen, but it happens the way that it happens, and I think it's okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. To your point, saying that we're in the middle, and something else will come, and they'll be making decisions. And by the time they're seasoned, they'll be making decisions that we are making choices that we don't have now. A lot of the technology that we're adapting is coming from the cosmetic kind of tattooing world and stuff anyways. But I was talking to someone in PMU or SMP, Scalp Micropigmentation. They own a business in that, and they were talking about developing a machine that, because they're not training artists, they're training technicians, almost like, people that do nails or hair or massages. And and they were talking about the ability to read the skin in milliseconds and disengage the needle if trauma occurs. So like the ability, basically, like, it would be a coil machine, but if you had like a little laser on the armature bar that was pointing straight at the point where the needle is meeting the skin, and it's making decisions based on those cells and the amount of trauma in those cells, and the machine would keep running. But it could literally, like, if you've ever seen, it made me think of saw stop, like, like the table saw, like table saws where if it'll cut wood, but if it hits flesh, it just drops.
Yeah.
like that type of thing. So
Very interesting. It sounds incredibly frustrating too.
yeah,
Because I
right.
bet you'd be like, what the, why is this
Yeah.
thing? Because I'm sure we're traumatizing skin more so than we need to in most cases, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So okay, so let's go ahead and try to at least try to give beginners an answer. If they want, what I'm a beginner, what should I buy? Is there a one size fits all? Should I buy multiple machines? Should I experiment? What machine is the most forgiving, or what are the qualities of a machine that would make it more forgiving than another machine?
Okay. Um, is there a one size fits all? Technically, I believe that's the approach that a lot of manufacturers are going after.
Mhm.
You know, they're trying to make something that is suitable for any genre. That's technically what my machines are trying to achieve. So yes, I do think there is potentially a one size fits all, or most one size fits most kind of thing. Is it better to have more than one machine? I think for convenience alone, the answer would be yes, but not necessarily. If you're on a budget and you've only got, you only have enough to buy one good machine, then that's also reasonable. It's just going to slow you down a little bit. And maybe after, you've made some money, you've started your business along a little bit, you can put in another chunk of money for a second one. You'll just be that much more stoked now that you've created some convenience in your setup. So yeah, yes and no on that. I mean, it's up to the budget of the individual, and um, experimenting, or how, I don't know how to experiment with machines unless you have friends that are willing to let you try, that kind of thing. I mean, when we do conventions, when we eventually do conventions, we'll have machines like loaners set up so people can go take it to their booth and try it for the day and that kind of thing. So that's always an option.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, if you're in a shop, which if you're just starting out, you're probably in a shop with other artists. There's probably a good opportunity to to try out different machines and see what's working for you.
I would say doing your research online, watching videos like this and other ones is going to be helpful for sure. And preference is definitely going to play a part. I would say, what is it that you're trying to? I mean, most artists know what they are attracted to, like color, black and gray, solid black, stuff like that. And I would say, so there is certain machines that are more appealing depending on what your style of tattooing is. But preference, find the ones that you are attracted to, and then do research on those and see what is it that's different about this. This one has adjustable stroke length on the fly. Am I going to need to adjust my stroke length multiple times? Look into that, figure this stuff out as much as you can, because really what it's going to come down to is, what do you want? What do you want to do? And you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm trying to take myself back to to struggling, to figure out how to put a solid line in, or to to get a solid fill of color. And there's so many variables, and I'm thinking the best I can about it, and I'm thinking, like, how many of them actually had anything to do with the machine? Probably not that many. More of the issues were with me, whether or not I was how I was holding how the client was positioned, how I was stretching the skin, how I was entering the skin. So it's like, how much of it really is the machine for beginners. So yeah, I think your advice is good. If you think that you're a soft black and gray, if you enjoy, like, if you draw the #2 pencil and you love to do like soft blends, and you're always smudging with your thumb and getting really smooth little rose petals and stuff like that on paper, then you might want something that's pretty soft hitting. And if you're someone that loves to, like, do bold graphic graffiti style chunky lines or whatever, you might want something that is a little punchier.
Yep. And some manufacturers will work with you, and for example, someone calls me and they don't know what configuration they want. I'm going to communicate with them, ask them the questions that help me to determine what's the best way for me to set this machine up? This machine, I can make it hit hard, I can make it hit soft, I can, you know what I mean? And that way, if you're going to be the guy that smudges and does your blends so soft, then I'm going to set you up with the aluminum bearing arm with the 28%, you know, that kind of thing. So there are, there is that level of interaction with the manufacturer or the company that you're getting your machine from.
Right. Yeah.
One thing I was going to say is regarding coil versus rotary, which one, not versus, but which one as a beginner to get. I would say that if you're working in a shop where there are people with coils, then maybe you lean towards coils. But if you're working in a shop that's only all the people are only using rotaries and you want to get a coil, you may find yourself in a situation where without the proper guidance on how to operate and tune and maintain, you will probably end up frustrated.
Yeah, because the thing is now, there are probably plenty of shops where no one in the shop has ever had any experience with a coil.
Yeah.
At this point, it's been long enough. So
yeah.
Let's kind of roll into, because we were talking about machines being more and less forgiving. Let's roll into forgiving machines and kind of some of the variables. Looking at some of your notes, how do I cause the least amount of skin trauma as I learn, which is a huge thing, and what determines whether or not a machine is forgiving? Like what factors make it a forgiving machine or a machine that beats skin up easily?
Okay, so I'll start with how do I cause the least amount of skin trauma while I learn? And so I think that the simple way to do that is tread lightly and work your way into it. In other words, like, be careful. In the beginning, you want to understand that skin, it's hard when you're learning not to damage the skin. So you really want to be soft and start that way. You may end up discovering that hard and fast is your thing, but you probably don't want to start off hard and fast. You probably want to start off slow and easy and gentle and start to learn the skin and understand the skin a bit more before you get into a harder, more aggressive approach.
Yeah.
Although, like if it's traditional style, going slow and soft is not the solution. You really do want to be hard and fast. So it really, again, it also depends on your style. But I would also say, even in that traditional, you're better off backing your way into it than just rushing headfirst into like aggressive tattooing.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. One thing that I would add to it, something I've suggested to people, is I think it's important to learn to read skin. And if you find that, of course, you don't know if there's excessive swelling or excessive bleeding, if you've never seen excessive swelling or bleeding before. But I always recommend that people, especially now with smartphones, any area at the end of a tattoo that looks suspect, any area that as you were working didn't do what you thought it should do, I try to get up and photograph those areas, or I recommend that you get up and kind of photograph those areas closely. Put cold water on it or Bactine on it and get all of the redness out of it that you can at the end of the tattoo, and get it as calm as it can possibly be. And then get a couple of good photos of it, and then make sure that you see it healed, and look back at those photos and say, okay, I thought that area looked a little strange. That's when I was doing this. Sure. And that has less to do with the machine, I guess, than just, learning to pay attention to skin.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, we're definitely not here to teach people how to tattoo in the video, but there are some things you could look for, like, bleeding, for example. My opinion is that, because I mean, sometimes it's a lot of blood, right? Mm-hmm. My gauge of whether or not it's too much is not so much how much is coming out, but for how long does it come out. Yeah. So if it bleeds and stops bleeding after 1 minute, then it's probably okay. If it bleeds for a minute and then bleeds for another minute and then bleeds for a third minute and it's still bleeding, now that's your indication you've done some serious damage. Mm-hmm. And how to determine swelling, like my skin swells like crazy. Like I welt up like a cat scratch kind of thing, like on just a line. So it's, different people are going to have different responses.
Yeah. And to your point, that's not really the focus of these talks. It's more for more about the technical, the machine side. But the reason I bring that up is that there are so many people that we've talked to over the years that reach out to us that are desperate, they have gone through apprenticeships, but they're in the middle of an apprenticeship in a small town with very few shops, where the person that owns the shop maybe has been tattooing for 6 years, and that person has 3 apprentices. That you see this stuff happening all the time, and there's no one to offer any guidance, and
Yeah.
it's tough. So,
I think anything is helpful at that stage, all the
right,
information, you cling to it. And
right.
So
Yeah, go ahead. What?
I was just going to say probably the same thing. What determines whether a machine is forgiving?
Mhm.
It could be a number of factors, but my personal opinion is that you want a machine that is not doing trauma, or at least it's the considerations for trauma are there. I think that all manufacturers are going to talk about give, or they're going to talk about something along those lines, and that's where you kind of have to do your research and figure out what, there's different ways of looking at it, and there's no one correct way, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, to go back, because like I said, I don't know how these episodes are going to be broken up, but when we're talking about digital give or even mechanical give in a rotary, to your point, it has the potential to increase the dwell time in the skin, how long the needles spin in the skin, which if your hand is moving, the longer the needles are in the skin, the more likely there's going to be excess trauma.
Yeah. Right. And so basically what we're saying is that like the default rotary mechanism is harsh on the skin. I'll be honest, like there are moments in these interviews where it's a little bit agonizing for me because we agreed that this isn't a Numa commercial, right? But of course, this is my company, and the thing is that the machines that I make are a response to my concerns about tattooing, and so half the time I'm thinking like, well, that's exactly why I did this for that reason or whatever. But I'm trying not to like, well, it's not about me. This is about just tattoo machines in general. So, but I will say that like what makes a machine forgiving, in my opinion, is not having a bunch of dwell time, getting the needle in and out really quickly. And so it's not, doing the snagging thing that we've discussed in previous videos where it's like plucking or hanging up on the skin. It's crazy how Coil was I guess actually the Coil came after the Rotary technically, right. But nobody really cared about the Rotary, and Coils were just almost perfect, just straight out of the gates. The action of that was so good. 100 years before anybody was like, like, can we do this better? And then can we? I don't even know. Can we?
Yeah, have we? Right.
Right.
Yeah. Like you mentioned in our earlier conversation, it's really just the inconsistencies in the coil, the tuning, and the things that change. And a perfectly tuned coil, probably there's no reason for anyone to have made a change outside of maybe weight or vibration or noise or
There's a bunch of shit about them that when I'm talking about how great a coil is, I'm really just talking about like this part of it,
right,
where the needle's coming out. I don't care about any of the rest of it.
Yeah. So what determines if a machine is forgiving? You went straight to give, so you think typically, people might think that if it has more give, it is more forgiving. You would say that it's the opposite of that, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I think that give is it's an illusion of forgiving, and it's really unfortunate that it is that way. If it might feel like you're doing less trauma, but I really don't think that you are.
Yeah.
But that is what makes a machine more forgiving, a machine that you can get away with more, you can do more tattooing and create less trauma in the process, especially when you're new and you're exploring and you're trying to figure stuff out.
What about as we go down the list of some of the bullet points that you made here? What stroke lengths cause the least trauma, and what stroke profiles do the least trauma? In case this is a video that comes out before we discuss that, let's talk just for a second about the difference between a stroke length and a stroke profile, just to clarify.
Stroke profile is something that my machine is really focused on. So if we're talking about rotaries, and that is basically if where the needle is, the position of the needle within its stroke cycle. So the needle goes out, the needle, extends and then retracts. So how long does it take to get to here or to here or to here or to here? And what is the timing of all of that? So in other words, like it's not identical. And if it is, actually, we're discovering that if the needle spends the same amount of time in every single position, that's a bad thing. That means that it's hesitating a lot in the extended position. What you want is it to spend more time out of the skin and less time in the skin to do the least amount of trauma. Right. So, and then stroke length is really just how far is the
travel.
Right, the travel, not the exposure of the needle. So that's like how much is coming out of the tip of the tube. But let's say you have this, it's coming out this much, but it still comes back in this much and then pokes out. That's still its stroke is this much. The question really is, which stroke length does the least amount of trauma? So, and that varies depending on the artist and the experience of the artist, in my opinion, again. So like, of course, there's exceptions to every rule. Like you were talking about Posh with his little tiny, the guy's got experience. He knows what he's doing. He's doing a good tattoo, period. So I'm not talking about those kinds of exceptions. I'm talking about the standards or the stereotypical, generalization, right? So you would think that, and for a new tattooer, yes, less needle equals less trauma. However, for somebody who's experienced and they know how to read the skin, they know how to do the tattooing, not necessarily, because like for me, if I'm packing solid color, I want to hit it hard and I want to use a lot of stroke length. I want to get it done and then I don't have to go back and do it again. Now, if I'm going to try and use a lesser stroke length, I might have to go over it more than once. And so then you're increasing your potential for doing trauma. So there's a couple different ways to look at it. I would say as a new tattooer, less stroke length. As an experienced tattooer, maybe more. Well, another variable to consider is skin types. And then there's even like body type, right? So if you have like really loose skin or really thick skin, it's going to be different. Like your stroke length is you're going to want a different stroke length than if you're working on somebody's shin, like on their calf where their skin's really already kind of stretched and you don't have to do much stretching, versus like a kidney area of a maybe slightly heavier person where it's harder to get a good tight stretch. In those kind of circumstances, you might want a longer stroke length versus like where the skin's already tight. You probably don't need a long stroke length. In fact, it's probably just wasting energy to have a long stroke length.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then another, kind of, as you're saying all that, I'm still thinking about stroke length versus the needle depth, like the depth of your setting that you can control. As whether you're working on a calf or a kidney area, you can control the needle depth. But you're saying regardless of the needle depth, a longer stroke length, because it's how much the length of time that it takes to make the full cycle and get back to that position.
In that particular example, I'm really talking more about needle exposure or depth.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, so what I've found is that, let's say I've got a 3.5 stroke length and I'm tattooing somebody on their love handle kind of area, right? And it's hard to get a good stretch. So my needle's out the same amount of that I'm always running it, let's say, which, so if this is my tube tip and the needle comes out, it definitely goes all the way back in. It doesn't ever like stop here and it goes all the way in and comes out again, right? I would still feel snag on a loose skin, even though I know my needle's coming all the way back in. So in that case, if I use the longer stroke, and I don't honestly know the reason, I think maybe because it slows down, it's not going in as fast. So if you have let's say a 4.2 stroke in that case, but you still stick the needle out the same amount, now the needle's coming, when it's coming into that back into the tip of the tube area, it's at a higher velocity and it's slowing down over here once it's already in. And so I'm thinking that's probably why you get less snag on something like that.
Okay. Well, what about stroke profiles that cause the least amount of trauma?
Depends on what you're doing. So if you're doing a line work, you want 20%. You want the really fast, the fastest the needle can come out. If your hand speed is really fast like mine, when you tattoo, you're moving really quick, you want a really fast insertion and retraction, like the 20%, 28%. Now, if you're doing slow building up, like a portrait guy would, then it makes more sense to have the slower cam, because or a slower speed machine, because or not speed as in RPMs, but speed as in needle speed, because if you're working really slow like this and the machine's like jamming really fast and hard, you're potentially going to do some damage that way too. It really depends on the way that you're tattooing.
Yeah, the way that you're moving. Yeah, I think that last bit you said, I think, is the most important point. If you're thinking about, that how many revolutions the thing is making, the machine is making, and then how fast you move your hand. It's like that thing is it's moving, it's poking, and if you're moving your hand super slow, there's a lot of pokes that just happen right there.
Yeah, and the truth is, like, I was actually talking to my motor manufacturer about, like, my argument was, well, I can tell the difference between 7.1 and 7.2, and he was like, no, you can't. And I think what I realized in that conversation was that what I actually can tell is the resonant vibration that's happening in the machine, and that cadence that happens in the speed of the needle versus the speed of my hand. So let's say the cadence at 7.1, I would have to slow my hand down to it where I'm feeling a little awkward. Whereas if I turned it up to 7.2, now we're like harmonizing together, So I think that there's something there as well. I mean, and it's not necessarily about speed. It's more because, like, the difference even between 6.5 and 7, the speed isn't that big of a difference. It's more about, your hand speed and the harmony between all of the variables.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not just making things harder for people, because.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think it's a good point. I mean, it's probably not the simple answer that people want, out of what stroke file. They want you to say, get this stroke profile if you want to cause the least trouble.
Well, my machines now come with all of them anyway. So just choose your stroke length. You get all of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you don't have to.
You are sending them all out with all the profiles. Oh, that's awesome. That'd be good. Something I was thinking about doing as I was working today. Because I work on, luckily I've been tattooing in the same town for 25 years, so all of my clients are like my family. I just work on the same people over and over, and they don't care how many sessions we work. They all sit all day anyways. And I've thought about, like, just setting the camera up and going through the different stroke profiles and doing the same type of motion, same type of tattoo, and being like, okay, this is what that did at 28%, and this is what that did at 40%. That'd be cool. If I do that, I'll try to cut them up so you can drop them on the website. Not that would necessarily help everyone else, but at least they would see where the area of the body, how I was moving my hand, and the marks that were left behind.
Sure. And the more information, the better. Somewhere up here, I think I deleted on the list, there was different types of tattooing styles, which, it made me think of like stippling, where you're kind of just like, I don't actually know how they're doing that, but I know that my customers prefer the 40% for the stippling. The 20%, like a liner, isn't the best for that style of working. And so I do think that the different styles plays into it for sure.
Yeah. I'm sure. I was just thinking if I reduce the number of variables and I made the same type of mark, with different cams. Really just, I was thinking about it for my own benefit at first. And I was like, I should put a camera. I mean, I have a camera over my station anyway. It's like, I should just turn the camera on for that.
Yeah, honestly, the more information we can gather, the better. It's kind of a new conversation. Stroke profile stuff is a new conversation in the industry.
I don't think I'd ever heard of stroke profile until we talked last fall. That was a foreign term to me. I'd never heard of it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Okay, so now we know which stroke profiles do the least trauma. Depends.
Depends. Good answer.
Good answer.
Hey, thanks again for watching. Please be sure to like and comment and subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date with all of the things that we are doing. If you would like to buy us a drink, please support us on Patreon. There's a button somewhere around here that allows you to do that. You can also visit our website and subscribe to our newsletter so you know where we're headed and what we're doing. And while you're there, please check out our merchandise page. Buy yourself a fancy new Fireside t-shirt. Thank you for supporting the Fireside Tattoo Network, and we'll see you on the next episode.